Here's why. When Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah left the Mu'tazila, he said in his book Al-Ibana an Usul al-Diyana, he said in his textbook that I am upon the creed of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This is what he stated. But when Imam al-Barbahari when he was told about his books and how he was debating, because you have to remember, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari came from the understanding that we can use Platonic reasoning and Greco-Roman thought to refute the cultists as well. And it can be cleaned up, it can be refined, and we can use it for an Islamic purpose. Remember, the Hanbalis had just defeated the Mu'tazila, who were doing just that and trying to dismantle the religion. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari at 40 years of age comes after that and says we can still reconcile it. So the door that had just been closed, it seemed to the Hanbali scholars that it was being reopened by Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, and they wanted to bang it shut. So Imam al-Barbahari, when Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari came to see him, he shunned him. And his books he didn't accept. And his statement to him was, which is in volume 1, of Tabaqat al-Hanabila, if memory serves me correct, is we only know the position of our Imam, Abu Abdullah Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal. And by doing that, it drew a line under the whole discussion on philosophy, Platonic thought, Greco-Roman reasoning. It drew a line under it. And because it also needs to be understood this: if somebody is a scholar in the ranks of the cults, like someone was a scholar among the Mu'tazila, Muslim Orthodoxy do not consider them scholars. They consider them laymen. No matter how much they learned, you are considered, when you come into Muslim Orthodoxy, even if you studied 40 years, you are a layman in Muslim Orthodoxy. So when Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari comes to Imam al-Barbahari, he doesn't hold him in any rank or any stature, and doesn't hold him as a scholar, and doesn't hold his books in any weight, because there is some philosophical element in Al-Ibana, there's some philosophical element in Maqalat al-Islamiyin, and other parts. And Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari brought other Mu'tazila with him into the deen, who were at different understandings. So in this time, you had Ibn Khafif, you had Ibn Mujahid, and around this time, the Ash'aris still were in dispute, and you can read this in Usul al-Din by Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi. There was still dispute among Ash'aris about, are the prophets fully infallible or not? Some Ash'aris said that they know they can commit sins, major or minor. Are prophets born prophets, or are they prophets at some point in time in which something happens before the prophet, it's a sin, but after the prophethood it's not? They still had all these disputes. Do we attribute to Allah the attribute of Ayn, or to Ayn, or all these issues, things that Abu Mansur al-Maturidi had ironed out, because he'd been the only one, him and the scholars around him. And Abu Mansur al-Maturidi was coming from a totally orthodox standpoint. He didn't come out of a cult. Do you understand? He was always orthodox. He had no previous baggage with him. So when he said that our position is this, it was coming from an understanding firmly grounded in orthodox tradition. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari was attempting to reconcile two worlds together, to reconcile the Platonistic thought with the Muslim theology, and to say that there can be a symbiosis, there can be a joining, there can be a meeting between the two. And a lot of the scholars in that time said no. So in some of the books, like for example, Al-Aqidatu Sahiha, there's remarkable differences between this book and Al-Ibana, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, theologically. And there's differences between that and Usul al-Din. And there's differences between Usul al-Din and Al-Asma'i wal-Sifat by Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi. And there's differences between that and Abu Bakr al-Baqilani. And I don't mean differences like whether we say there are 14 or 13 core attributes. I mean significant differences regarding the case of the prophets. Significant differences. And so because of that issue, because the Ash'aris they were so top heavy with different people within them that were at different levels of understanding, when Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari died, it left sort of a vacuum that other people had to grab pieces of and try to hold the whole structure together. Because the Ash'aris at that time were still mixed with the Mu'tazila. They were still mixed with them. Now, and this time, another scholar who died was Abu Ja'far Al-Jawhari Al-Baghdadi. He died in 379AH. He was a scholar of the creed that would later be named Ash'ari. Then there is Imam al-Daraqutni, who died in 385AH. Imam al-Daraqutni was one of the greatest hadith scholars that had ever lived. His name literally means house of cotton, but he is a scholar of what is called ilal. Ilal are flaws or missteps that will occur in a hadith that will at many points be missed by some, but will be picked up by scholars of precision. He was a master of what's called dabt, which means the right wording of a hadith, because in times past, hadith did not have they did not have fatha, kasra, dhamma. There was no i'jam. There were no consonantal markings, so people could tell what you were about and whether you were certified or not by when you read from the page. If you had enormous slips reading from the page, they were able to say, this person has not studied with anyone, this person knows nothing, this person is not a scholar. Because they can tell, because there were no helping vowels in the text to help you. Nothing. So Imam al-Daraqutni, he memorized around the area of 300,000 ahadith. Whenever there was discussion, he was a major Shafi'i scholar. Whenever there was any discussion about a weakness in a hadith or a defect or a particular narrator who's lacking in strength, his name comes up. His name always comes up whenever there's discussion because of how remarkable he was. Imam al-Daraqutni had a penchant for memorizing chains of transmission. And so someone would come to him and quote to him a chain with someone in it. And he would say, there's no way that chain is right, because this particular person that you're quoting only appears in the following chains, and he would quote all the chains that person appeared in. So there's no way that the person you're quoting to me could possibly be in the chain. That hadith, even before you even got to the text of the hadith, that sanad's weak, or it's fabricated, or it's invalid for use. And this is his achievement. Al-Daraqutni is used by Imam al-Nawawi in the first volume of the Sharh of Sahih Muslim in the introduction. He quotes him at length, him and Ibn Salah. But he quotes Al-Daraqutni there and in other sections of his commentary on Sahih Muslim, because when he wants to drive home a point in hadith terminology or in the science of hadith, he quotes Al-Daraqutni. Because Al-Daraqutni is the golden chain in hadith scholars. He is probably in hadith, in terms of his strength and his grading, after Imam Ahmed, probably one of the most significant people you can quote to say this hadith is authentic. There's certain people, if they say this hadith is authentic, that's the end of it. Imam Ahmed, Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Abu Dawood, Imam al-Tirmidhi, and al-Daraqutni. If he says, وَصَحَّهُ الدَّرَقُطْنِي, and Daraqutni said it's sahih, there's no further discussion on the matter, because he's that well-rounded. Further to that, we have Ubaydullah ibn Battah and Abu al-Husayn ibn Sam'un, who died in 387 AH. These two scholars, Ubaydullah ibn Battah was a major scholar of Iraq. He wrote a voluminous book called Al-Ibana. But that book, from what printed copies I've seen and one that I have, is about 5 volumes. And that book deals solely with the creed. 5 volumes. And each volume is about almost as thick or half as thick as a human fist from the knuckle to the thumb. And that's just creed. That's not usul fiqh, that's creed. 5 volumes of it. And his job, Ubaydullah ibn Battah, his job that he felt at the time was to catalog continuously the Arabic language, the sources of creed, and to explain why people deviate in creed. And he had a remarkable way of explaining his position, an acrimonious way of crushing his opponents in discussion or any type of debate. And he was known to be very gregarious and outgoing and very sociable with the people. Ibn Sam'un was a contemporary of his time, another scholar. Another one who is a very gifted scholar is Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. He died in 389 AH. Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, one of the great Maliki scholars of the Maghrib, a graduate of Qarawiyyin University. Ibn Abi Zayd, his Risala, which is, you will often hear his Risala mentioned in the part that just deals with creed. But his Risala is actually bigger. It deals with creed, fiqh, and other masail. Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani was known for his trustworthiness in the creed. He was known for his attention to detail. And he was also a champion in his time against the Fatimid North Africans, because he, as the chief graduate of Al-Qarawiyyin, resisted them and moved against them in books, lectures, public speeches, constantly moved against them. And it gave the people strength, because Egypt and North Africa was ruled by the Fatimid, by the Shia, for 100 years, and it didn't convert. But imagine how difficult it was being ruled for 100 years by a people that you don't share any beliefs with, but they were dominant over you. And it also is a testament to the correctness and the soundness of the Sunni creed, the fact that they didn't convert in mass. The fact that they ruled for a century and they didn't convert. It tells you something about the strength of the Sunnis, the power of the Sunnis, how they view it. And today, those Fatimi masjids, the mihrab that they have facing Karbala has either been plastered over, or people just sort of, when tourists look at it, they point and laugh and say, yes, there were some crazy people that ruled Egypt a long time ago. They are a footnote in history, if that. If that. From 401 to 422 Hijri, we have a number of events that occurred that were significant with regards to the cults. The head of the Batini cult died in this year, and it led to greater freedom for the people of Mosul in Iraq. The Batini were a cult that believed that the Qur'an and the Sunnah, the outward things that we see in the text, are not really there for the people who understand. Meaning, whatever the common people understand of the Qur'an and Sunnah, that's not really the Qur'an and Sunnah. The real Qur'an and Sunnah is behind the words. And this can only be unlocked by an ustadh, an initiate, a master. And when you go to him, he will tell you what's really inside of the Qur'an and Sunnah. So they would sometimes mock the people that were going on Hajj and say, we're going on the real Hajj. And the people that gave zakah, they would say, you haven't given zakah, we have given the zakah with our hearts. And they would say things like this. And their head died in the year 401 AH. A letter was sent to the Fatima rulers of Egypt in the year 402 AH, cursing them and denouncing their claims to having relation to Fatima az-Zahra radiallahu anha. Around the year 405 AH, Al-Hakim bi-Amrillah, Fatimi ruler of Egypt, forbade women to leave from their homes for eternity, or to visit female baths to purify themselves after their monthly cycle. Some women disobeyed and he had them killed. He had some old people drowned as he disliked them. He also ordered all dogs to be killed in Cairo. So Al-Hakim bi-Amrillah, some people believe that he was either insane or he was doing this because he was power hungry, but he did many things like that. He ordered all dogs to be killed in Cairo. He wanted the cats to be killed. He didn't want to hear birds chirping in the morning. He said that the women were not to leave their homes for eternity. Right? Some of us have picked up that custom, but we won't go into any of that today. But some of us have picked up that custom. But Al-Hakim bi Amrillah was one of the most tyrannical